So, Lisa, let's just start with what the Department of Education does, because I think most people know that public schools around the country are, in my opinion, unfortunately funded by local property taxes as opposed to the general fund of a state or federally for that matter. So what is it that the Federal Department of Education does?
Well, the U.S. Department of Education basically handles, upwards of $60 billion a year of money to help support our public schools. And they administer a number of programs that help support our schools. They also administer some of these grant programs for these charter schools and more. And they provide help for the schools in terms of programs like Head Start and others, where they're working in collaboration with other agencies like the Department of Agriculture on food programs for kids, school lunch, and things like that. And so they work both on their mission for our public schools, and then they work collaboratively with other agencies on programs, particularly for kids who are at need. But the Department of Education has been a really important agency in our federal government, in part because it works year-round to try to make sure that our schools are dealing with the problems that our kids are facing and trying to prepare kids for being productive members of a democratic society.
All right, so let's talk about Donald Trump's choice to become the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education. I mean, just obviously I want you to give us the breakdown on Betsy DeVos, but another billionaire added to his cabinet if he has his way. But have we ever seen a nominee to this post who has expressed more hostility to the very nature of public schools?
I don't think we ever have. I mean, a number of years ago, President Reagan put one of the Bennett brothers in charge, and he did have an agenda that was trying to claim, kind of pivot off this notion that America was at risk in the 70s, that the schools were failing. I think a lot of that was certainly trumped up as part of this broader right-wing agenda against our public schools. But in terms of, actually having a nominee who has devoted her life, or his life, but in this case her life, to trying to undermine public schools, you could barely find anyone who is less qualified for leading the Department of Education than Betsy DeVos. She's devoted her wealth and the last 25 years or more to an array of attacks on public education. She is the most unfit, most undeserving, least qualified person, I think, ever nominated to this post, and perhaps nearly any post in our federal government's history.
Before you tell us more about her on a specific point, because I know that you have 5 things that you perceive as being very important to know about this billionaire who's has largely dedicated her life, to the extent that she's been involved in the public sphere, it has been to, like you say, undermine public schools. We'll find out later as to what has been driving her throughout this experience. But why her? I mean, how did it come to be that she would get this pick?
Well, Betsy DeVos and her husband, Dick DeVos, who are Michiganders, have spent millions and millions and millions, and that's no exaggeration, funding the Republican Party and funding presidential campaigns and funding right-wing candidates. And so at one point, before the Kochs started spending more, and also before the Kochs launched their Freedom Partners network, Betsy DeVos was, in fact, with her husband, the largest soft money donor to the Republican Party. So she's been buying her way into politics for a number of years, buying access. And she's been quite open in her remarks about what she wants. She wants something in return. They want a return on investment, and they want to remake our laws to suit their vision, her vision for this country. And so because Donald Trump appears to be assembling not the best and brightest to run our government, but a gaggle of greed heads and retreads and others to advance really a corporate agenda, a so-called free market agenda. In some ways, Betsy DeVos is no surprise as a choice, but she certainly is the least qualified person, really you could pick for this post in terms of someone versus someone who has a devotion to our public schools, to the idea of public schools and public education. So she's paid her way into a position of power, basically, and she's being rewarded with a position of tremendous influence, and her track record indicates that she is not trustworthy of such a position of trust. Has she ever even had any interaction with public schools? She never sent her kids there, correct? She never worked. She was never worked as a teacher or anything in any of them, has she? No, she didn't go to school to get a degree in education. She hasn't worked as an educator, either as a teacher or an administrator of a public school. She lives in a really prosperous suburb outside of Grand Rapids. It's called Ada, Michigan, where the DeVos family fortune is headquartered. Basically, Amway is headquartered there. It's a town that has like 95% white population. It's got a much higher rate of median income than most cities in the country, and she refused to send her kids to public schools there in that town. And those schools, as far as if you consider the testing to be an accurate barometer of school success, and there's a lot of dispute over that, but those schools typically test well as well, and they didn't send their kids to public schools. She hasn't run for school board, either at the local level or the state level. She's never been elected to anything, and in fact, some of the measures that she's pushed when they've been brought up for a vote by citizens have been rejected, including in her home state of Michigan, where she and her husband have spent millions trying to basically take over the government there, and funded, in millions and millions of dollars of funding for right-wing groups, a whole assortment of different groups with these happy-sounding names that are basically advancing her agenda. And she hasn't been successful when people have a chance to actually vote on what she wants, as with the effort to try to voucherize Michigan. But she's someone who has no training in education. She's administered a scholarship program through a charity for the past 20-plus years, and she's admitted that charity program has predominantly sent kids to religious schools. And so she just really has no qualifications for running a public school system, let alone being the head of the public school system in the United States of America.
Well, no, to be fair, no qualifications based upon those who are looking to improve and maintain public schools or see public schools as a linchpin of our democracy. She has all the qualifications I think you'd need from the perspective of people who are hostile to that agenda, but sadly, most Americans are not, and this is who Donald Trump has chosen. All right. Well, and I know that in the course of her working this legislative agenda through her group, the American Federation for Children, she had hired a convicted felon to lobby on her behalf because of his connections with the state legislature. I mean, this honestly reads like if you had given me Lex Luthor's dossier, it would have read like this. I mean, this stuff is just sort of stunning. But the most stunning and disturbing parts we've yet to talk about. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what drives this billionaire, Betsy DeVos, who has had no contact with public schools in her adult life or through her two children. What is driving her to want to become head of the U.S. Department of Education? What is the, here's a little hint for people as we take a break. It's her faith. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.